Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, it's the Journalists Roundtable. A look at the week's top stories, including Arizona's Secretary of State deciding against a run for Congress. Journalists Roundtable is next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your public television station.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simon. It's Friday, and that means it's time for the Journalists Roundtable. And joining us tonight, Howie Fisher of Capital Media Services, Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic and azcentral.com, and Jim Small of the Arizona Mirror. Panel, good to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. Howie, we'll start with you. Adrian Fontes, not running for Congress. Are you going to announce that you're not running for Congress today as well?
I have an exploratory bid in for the governorship.
Gotcha.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. This is in some ways not a real surprise. I mean, in fact, we talked about this in the show. And the question is, do you go from being the number 2 person in Arizona, maybe number 3 after it becomes lieutenant governor position, to being one of 435 sitting in the House in the minority party? Even assuming they were to take over, Democrats were to take over, it's not a good position to be in. I think he finds himself in a very strong position. He gets quoted a lot. He is unavoidable for comment sometimes. And at some point, he may see this as a stepping stone to something more here in Arizona versus in Washington.
Yeah, being a member of Congress, the House of Representatives here in Arizona, those are long plane trips. You really got to want it, don't you?
Yeah, they're long plane trips, but given that district and the way it's drawn and probably future redistricting, it's going to remain probably a very strong Democratic district, which is if you get in now, because whoever wins this primary probably has a chance to be there for a long time.
But that's part of the equation as well. Do you want to be there long? Do you have higher ambitions?
Well, I mean, there's other things to consider as well, like the pay. Pay is vastly greater than what you get paid as Secretary of State.
Yeah. What do you make of all this, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Howie. I mean, I don't think this is terribly surprising that he wasn't going to run for this. The whole kind of nexus between Adrian Fontes, Secretary of State living in Phoenix, been up in the Valley for a long time, to former Maricopa County recorder, to run for a congressional seat down in Tucson, was that he had roots down in Nogales. It would be, I think it would be a challenge for someone, especially in Tucson and Pima County, for folks coming from Maricopa County down to there. I think that's the kind of thing that generates a lot of resentment. Up here in the Valley, that idea of carpetbagging, I don't think carries a whole lot of water, but certainly I think that there's a more kind of parochial view of it down in Pima County and in a lot of places in the state, frankly, that aren't in Maricopa County.
Well, and you also have to consider who else is likely to get it, already gotten in. Daniel Hernandez, who was an aide to Gabby Giffords when she represented the adjacent congressional district, but basically the same area. He was also a member of the legislature. He also got a lot of attention because after Gabby was shot at that little Congress on your street corner thing, he was credited with saving her life with some first aid. So he's got a lot of roots down there. And then, of course, you've got Adelita Grijalva. If the name sounds familiar, obviously, now she hasn't said yet, but you've got to wonder. I mean, it's not like it's just, well, I'm his daughter, therefore I should have it. I'm his daughter, and I serve on the Board of Supervisors, and I've served on the school district.
Yeah, regardless of who the opponents might be, it seems like it's hers to lose, doesn't it?
At least on the face of it, but as many people have pointed out, that didn't work out so well for Laura Pastor, who aspired to follow in her father, Ed Pastor's footsteps as a congressman, and she found another venue. I will say that coincidentally, or perhaps coincidentally or maybe not, President Trump issued an executive order that dealt with elections, which I'm sure you want to talk about, and that's the reason that Fontes has given publicly for why he has changed his mind, because he believes he can do more as the state's top election official on that matter.
And I do want to get to that after this one question. Yes. Howie, we'll go to you on this one. What is the next step for Adrian Fontes? It sounds like he's a little restless.
Well, I mean, sometimes you play the hand that's dealt you. At the moment, he is the Secretary of State. He won handily over Mark Fincham, although that may have been more Mark losing than Adrian winning. That Arizona voters have shown, at least on statewide races, that they're willing to elect Democrats. And I figured, another 4 years as Secretary of State, then you can see. Because at that point, Katie Hobbs will have been termed out, assuming she wins a second term. There's a lot of options in there.
Yeah, U.S. Senate, not an option because they got a couple of pretty strong Democratic candidates there. Jim, as Mary Jo mentioned, this election order that basically, it seems like it just federalizes election procedures around the states and around the country. That was mentioned by Fontes as one of the, he wants to fight that and wants other secretaries of state to fight that. What does that mean for Arizona elections?
Well, Arizona already requires proof of citizenship to register. It's one of the main things I think in that order is really that it says in order to register to vote, you have to prove citizenship and demonstrate it with documentation. Arizona voters passed that 20 plus years ago, so we already do that part of it. But you're right, though, this does federalize elections, right? And if anyone remembers the ongoing debate over elections during Biden's presidency, with the looking to pass federal election law and to really change, Democrats had a pretty sweeping proposal that Republicans decried as federalizing elections, and how dare they look to try to usurp the control of the states and to tell the states what to do in such an egregious fashion. And now, of course, Donald Trump comes in, and not through a law, but through an executive order, which is almost certain to get challenged in court for basically usurping Congress. It has come in and not just done the same thing, but used that same kind of idea, but used it to further the goals of the right on elections, which is generally to make it harder to register and harder to vote. And that's basically what that does.
I think if you look at the executive order that Trump issued, there are a lot of things that tie back to his grievances with how the 2020 election was conducted. And I will say that one of the impacts on Arizona, you're right, Arizona's had the requirement for documentary proof of citizenship for anybody that wants to vote in a state election or a local election. But we have this category called federal-only voters, and they don't have to provide proof. This would require that, and it also narrows the documents that somebody can provide to prove citizenship. So this could be problematic if you can't use your birth certificate under this to prove that you're a citizen, and you can't use your tribal ID. So you got to find other documents.
And it's not only that, there's other provisions in there. For example, if you re-register, if I move from Levine, let's say, to Mesa, normally I can just do that procedurally. Under what I understand the Trump proposal to be, I'd have to start over again, dig up my proof of citizenship and everything else. And again, it's throwing more hurdles. Then, of course, we have the president trying to privatize the post office, which then leads to some fascinating questions of what happens to vote by mail. Because if, in fact, 80-some% of ballots in this state are delivered by mail, but you set up a system that is not going through a government agency, have we scrapped vote by mail?
It seems like vote by mail would be a big casualty here in a variety of ways, doesn't it?
Oh, well, it's very popular.
Yeah.
It's very, and I mean, give them credit, down at the legislature, Republicans keep chipping away at they want to, they've accepted that that's how most people vote, but they're not fans of it. I think the big long game is to return this to the way that back in the day people used to vote when they'd walk to the polls, in their local precinct and cast their ballot, and magically all the votes would be counted by that night. One other thing I wanted to point out that's in the executive order that could affect all of the military and overseas voters from Arizona or in any state, it requires that they have to provide proof that they live in the state in which they are registered. Well, if you're on a military assignment in the Middle East or in Germany, you're not living in Arizona, but the UOCAVA law is intended to provide that cover. So there's a lot of questions around what that would mean, all of which everybody I've talked to so far is saying, yeah, we really need some clarity, and they're all banking on a lawsuit to sort that out.
Well, yeah, clarity in the sense that there are federal laws that govern all of these things already, and they all, the executive order basically pretends this federal law either doesn't exist or that the president by fiat is able to come in and say, oh, you know what? We don't care about these laws. We're going to ignore them. We're going to usurp them. We're just going to overrule them, which is not the way America works, and it certainly not the way, courts tend to take a dim view of the executive coming in and saying, I know there's a law, I don't care about it, we're going to do this other thing instead.
But isn't that the way this administration works?
Well, from day one, I mean, we all sort of laughed when he said prior to coming office, just make me a dictator for one day. Well, let's see, we're in day...
Who was laughing at that? No, honestly, who was laughing at that, Howie?
I thought it was meant to make me a dictator for just one day, and I'll see what I can do. Well, okay, it is now the end of March. Mr. Dictator has been there now for 3 months, and he's made it very clear that he believes that he can do what he wants. He can issue orders regarding DEI and threaten universities. He's issued orders saying, if you happen to be a law firm that has defended Democrats or gone against me, we can stop you from working on federal projects. Again, the good news on all this is that federal judges have said, hell no, you're not going to do that. For example, taking money away from Voice of America. The judges said, no, Congress allocated the money. You just can't come in and do that.
Yeah, it sounds like it's getting to be more of a heck no, but it still seems like it's a no. But regarding this particular situation, one of the reasons that Adrian Fontes, if it's when we talked to him here on the show, the day of the actual order, he says that he sees this as a way, as laying the groundwork for the Trump administration and the president himself to cancel elections in 2026. Does that ring to anything here?
I mean, he's not the first person I've heard that from, but if the infrastructure of elections is really all in the president's hands, you know, if you don't like how things, you know, and it might be that there would be elections, but they could be nullified afterwards on some kind of technicality, or you didn't follow this, you know, the Elections Assistance Commission didn't do this or that. And here's the problem with the National Voter Registration Act.
Well, let me even simplify it. What states of emergency, you know, whether or not these laws are changed, presidents have broad power on that. Look, he's even said that he's invoked the National Securities Act to explain why he doesn't need to tell a judge about the people he shipped off, the Venezuelans he shipped off to other countries. So he has taken this broad view in terms of what he can say, I am the president, you will obey me.
Well, you know, did anybody watch House of Cards? I mean, I was going to go back and refresh like the last season or two because they were messing around with elections in that, and it's like, wow, you know, Netflix was way ahead of its time.
The last point on this, Jim. So he says, as he said before, it's rigged, it's false, it's phony, I've been cheated, or we've been cheated, in this case if it's 2026. I mean, does Fontes have a point?
Yeah, no, I think he does, and I think you know, 2026 is definitely one thing, but I think 2028, right, is the next presidential election, and remember we saw this in 2020, where the U.S. House shows up to do their job to certify the election, and they object, and I think that you've absolutely opened the door on this for a Republican-held Congress to object to approving and you know, basically accepting the electoral votes from any state that doesn't follow to a T what this executive order says, whether a court overturns it or not. And they will use it as a pretense to say, oh no, all these states where the Democrats won, where the Democratic nominee won, no, they didn't. We're not going to accept these electoral votes. And hey, look at that, the Republican, whether it's Donald Trump trying to, you know, again, you know, thwart the Constitution and go for a third term, or another Republican or whoever it might be, I think it's a very real possibility, and I think it's really a frightening possibility.
But that scenario is why 2026 is crucial, because you might not get a Republican-controlled Congress in the elections next year.
Yeah, I think that's why he's focusing on that. All right, let's move on here, Howie. Legislative immunity, it survives.
I know, I'm shocked.
They're all getting vaccines.
Yes, well, I love that comparison. Since 1912, there's been a small provision in the Constitution, maybe not so small, that says lawmakers are privileged, because that's really the word they use, from arrest and citations during the time of legislation session and 14 days ahead of time, except for treason, felonies, and breach of the peace and traffic citations. And all of a sudden, we've talked how many times in this show about lawmakers with lead feet, you know, including, you know, Mr. Hoffman, including Mr. Fincham, including Ms. Wadzak down in Tucson. And Representative Wynn said, okay, it's time. Now, remember, he didn't like Fincham in the first place, so there's some politics in there. He got the bill out of the House, the measure to take it to the vote, say, give the voters the last word. Well, it got assigned over in the Senate to a committee, you know, and the chairman of that committee, you know, Kevin Payne, said, I'm not going to hear it. Why aren't you going to hear it? Oh, there aren't the votes. Well, what do you mean? Well, I'm one of the no votes, and it doesn't make any sense. And there's a reason the immunity is in there. So for the moment, at least this session, the concept is dead, but I don't think the issue is dead.
I was going to say, is this dead or is it still twitching?
Oh, I mean, it could still be twitching. It puts lawmakers in an uncomfortable position because do you want to go on record as sort of affirming your privilege, which the Constitution does give them, or do you want to maybe just hold your nose and vote for it and make sure that you do not speed or have traffic infractions?
If this went to the voters, Jim, what would the voters say about this?
I would have to imagine that the voters would probably very enthusiastically vote to amend the Constitution for this situation. I mean, it's fairly narrowly crafted to apply to these traffic citations to stop, what really I think are embarrassing kind of headache stories for all the legislators who are following the rules to have to sit there and, have to answer questions, be like, oh my God, like my colleague, is driving 95 miles an hour on I-10. They don't want to have to be dealing with that. And it's, on top of the fact that, I think that it just rubs people the wrong way. And I think it leaves a bad taste in regular Arizonans' mouths, anyone who's ever gotten pulled over and gotten a ticket.
And the argument behind it theoretically was that let's say you had a governor, we're not mentioning KH or somebody else by name, and she didn't want lawmakers to come to the Capitol to be able to vote on a specific bill. She could send out the DPS and they could sideline you and keep you from coming up and voting, which A, has not happened, has never happened, and B, as Quang Nguyen pointed out, you're assuming that the DPS would go out and be bullies and henchmen for the governor and hold people aside. And C, the fact is, if you're a lawmaker and you're trying to get there for a vote, first of all, you're already late, and shouldn't be speeding, and B is you call up the speaker, you call up the president of the Senate and say, I'm running late, postpone the bill.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. But, for my money, I think this won't, I don't think it'll get sent to the ballot this year. I don't know if Representative Nguyen would try to resurrect it next year, because who knows how many more traffic violations we might have between now and next year.
Well, yes.
Are we running an over and under on that?
The year is young. Mary Jo, sticking with you, lobbyists, the idea of banning lobbyists from office for a certain period of time, a Republican thinks that's a really good idea, but that would hurt a Republican gubernatorial candidate. What's going on here?
Well, this is a last-minute Stryker amendment on a ballot referral from Senator Jake Hoffman. And his argument is that, if you've served as a lobbyist, you should not be eligible to run for statewide office for at least 2 years after having left your lobbying gig. It's somewhat similar to what lawmakers have to live under now. You got to be away for a year before you can come back as a former lawmaker to be a lobbyist. But the timing of this and the very specific wording is pretty clearly pointing at Karen Taylor Robson, who's a Republican candidate for governor, who just earlier this week, I think, resigned or withdrew her lobbying registration.
For Resolution Copper.
For Resolution Copper, and she's also lobbied for the city of Phoenix.
And for APS.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but it sounds like that might be who he's targeting. Also, the quote is, Karen Taylor Robson is a valid example of why legislation is needed. Jim, that seems like it's a pretty strong hint.
He's not hiding what it's about. The whole idea, this prohibition on lobbying after you become a legislator, right? The whole idea is that you're not going to leave the Capitol, go get a high-paying job, and then turn right around and leverage all the relationships that you had built within the building, within the House, within the Senate, within the governor's office. And so this kind of flips that on its head and says, oh, well, I don't know that I understand the logic outside of the political retribution. It doesn't really, the logic of, well, a lobbyist shouldn't become an elected official, but that's not really the way that power dynamic tends to work, right? The idea is to keep people from kind of, profiting off of their public service and then turning around and lining their pockets with that. This kind of goes the other way. Typically, lobbyists get paid way more than legislators do, or than the governor does. And so outside of the pure politics of it, and Jake Hoffman wants Andy Biggs to be the next governor, and that's going to be the Republican primary, I'm sure. That's really what this is about stopping.
And I love the way he crafted this. Because of the fact that it will be a change in the Constitution, it would have to go on the ballot in 2026, which is the same year, assuming Karen survives the primary, she would be on the ballot. And normally, anything that's on the ballot at the same time would be prospective only. No, you'll love this. He's got it set that if you've been a lobbyist for 2 years before the primary of that year, which would go back to August of 2024, you meant not that you can't run, but that you can't serve. So let's assume the election is certified on November 23rd of 2026, so that becomes part of the Constitution. New governor doesn't take office until the first day of January of 2027. So he's phrased it in a way that it could only affect one particular person, and we all know who that is.
Yeah, is this referred to the ballot? Is this a referral here, or is this something that voters would, again?
This would have to go before
yeah,
voters.
and voters would say what?
Well, I think it would all be tied up with the governor's race, but you're getting way ahead of yourself. I don't think this is going to go very far at all.
Well,
I mean,
that's kind of what I was asking there.
you need, to get this thing on the ballot, you got to have, 31 and 16 votes, and the Republicans hold the majority, and not every Republican is backing Andy Biggs for
Okay,
governor.
but the other half of it depends on where the Democrats fit into this. So let's assume the Democrats want Andy Biggs to be the nominee, figuring he'd be easier to beat for Katie. So they say, oh, let's put this on the ballot. Let's help the Republicans, the anti-Karen Taylor Robeson people, put this on the ballot and have it there. And again, I don't know what would happen. She might file suit if she wins in 2027. But at that point, the Democrats say, let's throw it on the ballot. Let's keep Karen's position as a lobbyist up until recently, up until last Tuesday, in front of the public.
Little jujitsu there.
Yeah, certainly. And if the goal was to try to persuade Republican voters to not to not back Karen Taylor Robeson in the primary, I think that there's something to that. If she got through the primary, it wouldn't help Democrats one lick, though, is the thing, right? Because we're going to have a lieutenant governor. And so if she's not able to take office, to take the oath of office, then that lieutenant governor is who would then become elevated to governor for the first time in the state's history, which would be quite the introduction to us having a lieutenant governor.
No kidding.
And that's the really fascinating part. Under the lieutenant governor system we passed a couple of years ago, after the primary, each candidate chooses his or her own lieutenant governor. And so we wouldn't even know until sometime after August of 2026 who Karen Taylor Robeson, assuming she's the nominee, would pick. And so you'd end up, again, following the scenario that she couldn't take office, with the governor being somebody that nobody ever chose in the first place.
Let's talk about the idea, maybe Wendy Rogers running for anything with Walt Blackman somewhere close by. What are these two people are fighting over a stolen valor bill that it looks to me like it makes a heck of a lot of sense. But you tell me, what's this all about?
Yeah, Senator Rogers and Representative Blackman don't get along at all. They're seatmates. They represent the same district, but they do not. There's no simpatico there. So Blackman introduces this bill to expand on what the federal stolen valor law says. And Rogers objects and says, well, wait a minute, she asked for some changes, like just make it comport with federal law. And he disagreed, and the bill never, even though it got out of the House, it never came up for a hearing before Rogers' committee, because she chairs the committee to which it would be assigned. And the Senate President, Warren Peterson, said, I empower my chair people, and it's up to her if she wants to move that bill. And
again, stolen valor bill means you can't say that you were a decorated military hero when you were not a decorated military hero.
And this isn't just that, right? This actually makes it a crime, but it's not just claiming that you were, a Vietnam veteran. It's if you use that to gain state benefits. And so essentially, if you're defrauding the government in order to get some benefits out of it, this whole thing stretches back to last year's election. Again, a part of this bad blood, these warring kind of political factions in this rural Arizona district. Walt Blackman was running against a man named Steve Slayton, and Slayton claimed to be a Vietnam veteran. Veterans groups came out and said, no, he's not. We've got, we have his forms from the Pentagon. He didn't serve in Vietnam. He is a veteran, but he was not in Vietnam, like he said. I think he was in Korea.
I think he's a decorated veteran too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And at some point during the back and forth of the campaign trail, there were allegations that Slayton had forged a document to prove that he was in Vietnam, and there was all of this hullabaloo about it. Wendy Rogers was aligned with Steve Slayton. Walt Blackman was running against him. I think that is really what the kind of the core of this is. And I think even in her statement explaining why she wasn't going to hear this bill, Wendy Rogers basically acknowledged, yeah, this is all about basically raw politics on both sides. You know, Blackman is Representative Blackman is putting this bill forward because he's trying to, you know, go after a political opponent, and I'm trying to protect a political ally.
So basically, this is more Republicans cannibalizing their own, just like the story we talked about with Hoffman. The hatred among people, and you know, you guys have both seen this because you're down there. It used to be, and again, I'm sure, you know, when I was a child and walked up hills to school both ways in the snow, when I came here in the 80s, and you know, Mary Jo a little while after that, there was politics, but people, it was not personal. It was not this sort of vitriol that we see now. Now it's become very personal, and it's become, you know, I am attacking you not just of what you think because I don't like you, I don't like this way you smell, I don't like the way you comb your hair, and it's all become personal, and that's all that's going on here.
Is that all that's going on here?
I think so, but it'd be interesting. I think Rogers is in her third term. You know, eventually she's going to term out in the Senate, and would she try to take on, you know, Representative Blackman in the House? Would they swap seats? Obviously, probably not under any kind of agreement, but so it might keep playing out. We got another year, another
right.
3 years.
Well, we don't have any more time for tonight, so good show. Good to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. That's it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great weekend.